The third plague of ancient Egypt was insects. Now, I know some locations in Bibles, etc., says lice. However, there is no flying lice that I can find anywhere, which means it was more than likely mosquitoes. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll see that Enlil had deliberately caused the drought, which made the frogs, because they blocked off the waterways, all go down the Nile and end up. So that was another plague. But eventually these frogs died off, and of course the red tide of what was in the water, which was another plague, also made these insects travel and eat off of the dead frogs. So again, Enlil having to deal with Moses. I'll explain who Moses is later. Clearly there's a distinction between Enlil's drought and all these plagues. The fourth plague of ancient Egypt. Now, in the Haggadah text, it says that it was beasts. However, in other literature, it kind of makes it sound like it was flies. Now, in Hebrew, the word avrov is a mixture, so it could actually be both. Now, if you think that Enlil had basically blocked off waterways, etc., then these animals, flies as well as any other mammals, would have been looking for food and water in a place, so they would have migrated to the next nearest place, which would have been Egypt along the Nile. So that again makes sense, as opposed to an almighty being deciding to send down flies, etc. And again, the ancient text is the Atrahasis that actually admits that Enlil did cause the drought. So once again, another plague, I think, is just Enlil. The fifth plague of ancient Egypt is where the cattle in Egypt died. Now, if you watch my previous videos, you'll see that there was frogs and other animals and insects that headed towards Egypt because of Enlil and his drought that he planned. Now, once they all got there, they all started to die, and insects such as the Calocudes would have fed off of the dead frogs as well as the other animals that had arrived, and then spread to the actual cattle and infected them with diseases, which is quite logical. Now, the reason why in the Bible it says the Israelites didn't have their cattle die compared to the Egyptians is really, let's be honest, it's 400 miles from Cairo to Israel. That's a hell of a long distance. I mean, England is 420 miles long as the crow flies, so you can imagine these insects not wanting to fly 400. The sixth plague of ancient Egypt is said to have been boils of some description on whatever livestock was left and the humans. Now, the story goes that the Lord, which would have been Enlil, would have told Moses and Aaron to throw up some ash of some description into the sky, which caused this disease or plague. Now, the nearest volcano, if it was going to be, there's Egypt there, and the nearest volcano is way down here, so the chances of that erupting at the same time, possible. But if you go back to the actual logic of everything else has already happened, all of their cattle were dying, as said in the last fifth plague, so they had very little to eat and was probably eating rotten things with bacteria, etc., in it, which would explain why they ended up with all these boils. The seventh plague of ancient Egypt was said to have been fiery storms with rocks coming down that were on fire, which leads us to believe that it was some sort of volcano. Now, this actually would lead on from the previous plague, which was number 6, which was where Moses and Aaron was to throw up some ash into the sky. Now, if we conclude that a volcano started to produce ash but didn't actually erupt, then that would make sense with the ash, and then obviously when it did start to erupt and more ash came out and smoke clouds, that would then cover and destroy their crops, which is what was said to have happened. So on this one, it may not be an actual plague. In my opinion, it was more than likely a volcano, which Enlil wouldn't have had any control over.